Steel screams as it's dragged across a factory floor. Sparks spit from welding torches. Men and women in oil-stained overalls rush between half-finished hulls, the air thick with heat and urgency. There's no music here, just the grind of machines pushing themselves to the edge. And here's the question that hangs over all of it. Could you build a tank in less time than it takes to watch this video? Because in this place, speed isn't a metric and it's a weapon. Detroit isn't just making tanks. It's trying to outrun a war. Detroit doesn't wake up one morning and decide to build tanks. It's pushed into it, almost dragged. Before the war, this city is the heartbeat of American cars. Fords rolling off lines with practiced ease. Dodges and Chryslers born from steel, chrome, and the promise of open roads. Assembly lines are tuned for comfort, not combat. But then Europe collapses in a chain reaction. Poland falls. France crumbles. The Luftwaffe burns its way across the continent. And suddenly the old world is on fire. Washington looks at the storm gathering across the Atlantic and realizes something blunt and terrifying. America isn't ready. Not in numbers, not in equipment, not in experience. The army of 1939 is smaller than Portugal's. Tanks? Barely enough to outfit a training exercise. Most are outdated, slow, or lightly armed. Museum pieces pretending to be weapons. Yet even as the situation deteriorates, the U.S. government hesitates. Isolationism runs deep. The public wants neutrality. Industry wants stability. And Detroit, the engine of American manufacturing, just wants to keep making cars. Then comes the shockwave that breaks the stalemate. The fall of France in 1940. A modern nation, defeated in 6 weeks by a German war machine built on precision engineering and ruthless speed. Suddenly, every American commander carries the same fear. If Germany turns west to east, and Britain falls, the U.S. will stand alone. The Army's solution is desperate but bold. Rebuild the entire military-industrial base from scratch. Not gradually, immediately. But here's the thing, and the government can't do it alone. It doesn't have the capacity, the blueprints, or the factories. Only one city in America knows how to mass-produce complicated machines at scale. Detroit. And this is where the leap happens. The same production lines tuned for sedans and coupes must now churn out armored vehicles, cannon mounts, transmissions rugged enough to survive mud, sand, and fire. It sounds impossible. To some, it looks suicidal. The early attempts show just how steep the climb is. Engineers from the auto companies clash with military officers who still think like horse cavalrymen. Early prototypes shake themselves apart. Turrets jam. Engines overheat. Detroit is fast, but tank warfare is unforgiving. A mistake here costs lives. Still, the pressure only increases. The German blitzkrieg tears through the Balkans. North Africa becomes a contest of armor and fuel. And across the English Channel, British factories strain under constant bombing. America isn't in the war yet, but the clock is running whether Detroit likes it or not. Then, in 1941, something shifts. A new partnership forms, part desperation, part genius. This is the birth of the Detroit Tank Arsenal, a massive purpose-built factory funded by the U.S. government, but operated by Chrysler. It rises from farmland outside the city like a steel cathedral. At its peak, it's the largest tank manufacturing facility on Earth. Here's what makes it radical. Detroit refuses to build tanks like Europe. No handcrafted armor, no artisanal machining. Every part must be standardized, interchangeable, and built by the thousands. A tank should roll off the line like a car, predictable, repeatable, repairable. The learning curve is brutal, but after Pearl Harbor, everything snaps into focus. The war that once felt distant is now personal. The arsenal of democracy, Roosevelt's phrase, becomes Detroit's identity. Teenagers, mothers, machinists, welders, engineers, immigrants, they all flood into the factories. They work night shifts, double shifts, shifts long enough that people collapse on break room benches. Output climbs. Mistakes shrink. Logistics tighten. What begins as chaos starts to look like choreography. Somewhere in these early months, a truth reveals itself. America won't match German engineering. It will overwhelm it. Quantity becomes a strategy of its own. And here's the interesting connection. While tanks thunder out of Detroit, another battle unfolds far away, in a frozen forest. The same industrial muscle that feeds Patton's armor columns will later determine whether the 101st Airborne survives the siege of Bastogne. The war is a web. Pull one thread in Michigan and it shivers in Belgium. But before we get there, Detroit must learn to do something no nation has ever done. Mass-produce tanks, faster than the enemy can destroy them. Walk inside the Detroit tank arsenal in its first real months of operation, and the scale hits you like heat from a furnace. Conveyor belts stretch the length of football fields. Overhead cranes lift armored hulls that sway like ship keels. Nothing about this looks like a car plant anymore. It's an industrial battlefield. But the truth is, the early days are rough. Raw steel arrives late. Tools break under stress they were never designed for. Workers trained to install dashboards now have to weld armor plate thick enough to stop an 88mm shell. Every flaw becomes a crisis. Every hour lost feels like a weapon you failed to build. And then there's the tank itself. The M3 Lee, America's early attempt at a stopgap design, is boxy, awkward, and compromises its way into existence. It has 2 guns mounted at different levels. It's tall enough to be spotted a mile away. The Russians call it a coffin for 7 brothers. Detroit hates building it, but it needs the learning curve. That curve pays off in 1942, when the M4 Sherman becomes the new centerpiece. For the first time, Detroit has a tank designed for mass production. Not perfect. Nothing in war is perfect, but simple enough to build by the thousands, and rugged enough to keep moving after damage that would cripple a German Panther. What really unlocks the machine, though, is the mindset shift. When Chrysler engineers see GIs in North Africa struggling with broken drive shafts, they redesign the parts for faster field repairs. When a shortage of cast turrets threatens production, Detroit switches entire assembly sections to welded turrets in weeks, not months. Every bottleneck becomes fuel for innovation. Standard parts, standard tools, standard training. It sounds ordinary, but this is how you build war-winning scale. And while America adapts, Germany moves in the opposite direction. Berlin keeps chasing specialized, complex tanks, each one powerful but slow to build, slow to maintain, and dependent on a shrinking pool of skilled labor. The Tigers and Panthers arriving at the front look terrifying on paper, but their numbers never catch up to what Detroit is doing on a single square mile of Michigan farmland. Meanwhile, the war widens. North Africa turns. Sicily falls. The push into Italy begins. Everywhere American forces go, the same truth follows. Logistics wins campaigns, not machines alone. Months later, when snow buries the Ardennes and the 101st Airborne digs in at Bastogne, they're cut off, freezing, and nearly out of everything. Their survival depends on one thing: whether American armor can break through the German lines fast enough to reach them. And that armor traces its lineage straight back to these factories. Detroit doesn't know it yet, but the tanks rolling off the line will carry the burden of wars thousands of miles away. By late 1942, the United States is outproducing every Axis nation combined. But the race isn't over. Germany hasn't collapsed. Japan is gaining ground in the Pacific. And American commanders know they'll need more. Not just tanks, but replacements for the tanks that don't come back. The arsenal expands. Training centers explode in size. Supply chains reorganize. What was once a car city is now a war machine running at full throttle. But building tanks faster than the Reich isn't just about numbers. It's about people, millions of them, pushing themselves past exhaustion to meet quotas that rise every month. And the question that keeps echoing through these halls is simple. How fast can Detroit really go before it breaks? Walk the factory floor during peak wartime output and you see something rare, an industrial organism made of human beings. Every line, every motion, every clang of steel feeds the next step. It feels alive, impatient, almost restless, like it's trying to move faster than the people running it. Here's the thing about Detroit's workforce. It doesn't look like the pre-war auto assembly crews. By 1943, the draft has emptied the city of thousands of young men. What fills the gap isn't a temporary fix, it's a social shift. Women leave kitchens, schools, and offices and step into welding booths that vibrate with heat. Immigrants who once built fenders now shape armor plate. Retirees return, hands shaking but steady enough to rivet. Teenagers lie about their age and work 12-hour shifts because no one has time to check their paperwork. Most of them have never seen a battlefield. But they know someone who will fight in a tank they build. That connection changes everything. You can see it in the way they move. Fast, focused, no wasted effort. And then there's fatigue. Constant grinding fatigue. People collapse on benches with their boots still on. The night shift clocks in as the day shift stumbles out. Managers try to slow things down, but the quotas keep rising. The war keeps swallowing machines. No factory whistle can remind these workers of the stakes. They already know. From a planner's perspective, the math is brutal and clean. Germany has exceptional tanks, high-velocity guns, sloped armor, long-range optics, but they can't replace losses fast enough. Every destroyed Tiger removes months of labor and thousands of precision machined parts from Germany's shrinking supply chain. American commanders see the opportunity early. If Detroit can build fast, the battlefield can bleed slow. The Sherman becomes the embodiment of that logic. It's not the best tank, and everyone knows it, but it's the best tank to build, to ship, to maintain, and to repair under fire. Its parts fit like Lego. Its engine can be swapped in the field. Its gun can be upgraded without redesigning the whole vehicle. In a war fought across continents, the ability to replace a tank overnight is its own form of armor. And this is where the German perspective becomes almost tragic. Each new model Berlin produces, the Panther, Tiger, Tiger II, pushes the engineering envelope higher but tightens the noose around German production. Every improvement demands rare materials, skilled machinists, and time Germany no longer has. Detroit watches this and doubles down on the opposite approach. Simplify, then multiply. At the center of this transformation are men like William Knudsen, a former auto executive pulled into uniform specifically because he understands scale. Roosevelt doesn't ask him for strategy. He asks him for production miracles. Knudsen's mantra is simple. The military must stop thinking like soldiers and start thinking like manufacturers. He pushes for standardization, rejects perfect but slow, and breaks bottlenecks with a blunt force pragmatism the Army isn't used to. Under him, companies that once competed fiercely begin sharing tools, dies, and designs. If Ford solves a casting problem on Monday, Chrysler hears about it on Tuesday. If GM finds a faster layout for its assembly lines, it becomes everyone's new template. This isn't normal wartime cooperation. It's industrial fusion, and of all the leaders involved, one stands out for sheer audacity. Chrysler President K.T. Keller, who takes charge of the Detroit tank arsenal. Keller doesn't think like a general. He thinks like a man who hates inefficiency. To him, slow work is profanity. He redesigns workflows. He splits tasks. He builds training rooms inside the factory so workers learn while the line keeps moving. He hires specialists to solve bottlenecks one by one, sometimes overnight. His goal isn't to build tanks well, it's to build them relentlessly. The heart of the arsenal isn't the welding booth or the assembly line. It's the machining floor. Heavy presses pound steel into shapes that once required days of handcrafting. Conveyor systems move components that used to need forklifts. Subassemblies arrive from partner factories across the Midwest with matching tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. This is where the American concept of interchangeable parts becomes a weapon. Germany builds tanks like luxury cars, meticulously, beautifully, and slowly. Detroit builds them like appliances, reliable, replaceable, and everywhere. The result? A Sherman with a damaged turret ring doesn't have to be scrapped. It just needs a new ring, one of thousands identical to it. In war, that kind of predictability is priceless. From the German side, Detroit becomes a kind of ghost adversary. Invisible, untouchable, but always expanding. German tank crews don't talk about American factories, but they feel their presence every time they knock out a Sherman, and another arrives the next day. German officers read American production reports with disbelief. One colonel in the Panzerwaffe reportedly mutters that the Americans treat tanks like disposable razors. It isn't an insult, it's frustration. Every destroyed Tiger buys Germany a brief moment of advantage, but the balance of power tilts back before the smoke clears. Berlin knows the numbers. They know what they mean. But there's no answer. Germany can't relocate factories inland. The bombers follow. They can't ramp up production. The workforce is shrinking. And they can't simplify designs without admitting their engineering philosophy was flawed from the start. Detroit doesn't beat the Reich on the battlefield. It beats it in the math. Inside the arsenal, something strange happens. Workers start referring to tanks not as machines, but as responsibilities. Welders argue over seam quality like surgeons obsess over stitches. Test drivers push prototypes until their teeth rattle. Not because they enjoy it, but because a flawed steering linkage in Michigan is a dead crew in Tunisia. There's pride here, but it's a pride built on pressure. Everyone understands the gap between their world and the world these tanks are going to. That distance weighs on them. A woman riveting armor plate once said that every time she set a bolt, she imagined a shell hitting it. That's not propaganda. That's psychology under total war. Detroit becomes a place where people work as if the war is happening in the next room. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Mass production doesn't just win wars. It creates moral tension. When you can build 10 tanks for every one the enemy fields, the nature of combat changes. Commanders take risks they wouldn't take if every machine were irreplaceable. A damaged Sherman is written off with a pencil stroke. A burned-out hull becomes a statistic, not a tragedy. The battlefield becomes an equation. For Detroit's workers, that equation cuts both ways. It saves lives by giving American crews replacements. But it also creates a sense of distance, as if the slaughter is happening inside a ledger. This is the quiet moral weight underneath the arsenal's success, the knowledge that industrial superiority means both protection and sacrifice. Look at the numbers and you see something that doesn't feel real. At peak output, the Detroit tank arsenal produces a complete Sherman every hour, not a part, not a subassembly, a full combat-ready tank. 1 hour. It's hard to visualize what that means, so picture this. Every time a shift worker looks at the clock during a grueling night shift, another 30 tons of steel and firepower roll toward the front. Germany simply can't keep pace. By the end of the war, the U.S. produces nearly 50,000 Shermans. Germany builds around 1/10 of that in their medium and heavy categories, and the war hasn't even reached its turning point yet. That's coming, because there's a moment, a very specific moment, when Detroit's output stops being preparation and starts becoming destiny. The turning point doesn't come in a factory. It comes on a battlefield thousands of miles away, where Detroit's promises either hold or collapse under fire. North Africa, 1942, the first real test of American armor isn't glorious. At Kasserine Pass, U.S. tank crews meet experienced German units for the first time. The result is brutal. Shermans burn. Lees fall apart. Crews abandon vehicles riddled with holes from 88s that reach out farther than anything America fields. But here's the key. While commanders study the tactics, Detroit studies the wreckage. Engineers push photos of shattered transmissions and cracked bogies across drafting tables and redesign the parts before the sand has settled. Germany learns America adapts, and the adaptation accelerates. Mid-1943 factories begin producing upgraded Shermans with better armor layouts, improved suspensions, and higher velocity guns. But the real breakthrough isn't technical, it's systemic. Detroit reorganizes itself like a military campaign. Supply lines become arteries, sub-factories become brigades, and scheduling becomes strategy. When the arsenal identifies a bottleneck in turret production, subcontractors shift within days. When steel shipments slow, the government reroutes entire train networks to feed the lines. By summer, something extraordinary happens. The output curve bends upward, and the Germans never catch up again. Numbers start to feel like momentum. Momentum starts to feel like inevitability. Picture the factory at its harshest hour. Deep night, third shift, air thick with welding smoke. A foreman rubs his eyes, looks down the line, and sees a row of tanks in various stages like a timeline of the war itself. At Station 14, workers bolt the final pieces of the powertrain. At Station 22, electricians test the radios. At Station 28, the 75mm gun slides into place. Every stage clicks forward like gears in a clock. The line can't stop. Not for holidays, not for storms, not for human limits. Because out in the field, tanks don't wait for anyone. Italy, 1944. As the Allies push through Italy, Shermans become the backbone of every armored advance. German Panthers and Tigers still outclass them head-on. But American crews learn to use speed and coordination. Shermans swarm, flank, overwhelm, and every loss, every tank knocked out by a dug-in 88 or a hidden Panzer, is replaced almost immediately. Ships unload new Shermans in Naples, Anzio, and later at the ports of southern France. Sometimes they arrive faster than units can field them. This is the war Germany fears, a war where the enemy's factories don't break, don't slow, don't sleep, and then everything changes. Because while Italy grinds forward, another front is about to explode, a front where industrial capacity becomes life or death in a matter of hours. The Ardennes. December 1944. Detroit's influence on the war is about to reach its highest stakes when the Germans launch their surprise offensive in the Ardennes. The 101st Airborne ends up surrounded at Bastogne. Food runs out. Ammo runs low. Temperatures plunge. Paratroopers dig foxholes into frozen earth and wait for an armor column that might never arrive, but Patton's tanks are already moving north. Columns of Shermans built by the same workers who collapse on lunchroom benches back in Michigan. It's a straight line from Detroit to this frozen forest, even if no one can see it. German commanders bet on time. Detroit erases the bet. Shermans hit the snow-covered roads in numbers Germany can't match. Even when they're ambushed, even when they're burned out and replaced, more come. The American armored divisions push through the choke points one by one. And on December 26th, a single column breaks into Bastogne. The siege cracks open. The 101st holds. The German offensive begins to unravel. Nothing about that moment is accidental. It's built on the hours, days and months inside a Michigan factory where tanks roll off the line like clockwork, but the decisive moment is still ahead, because Bastogne proves what Detroit can do. The push into Germany will show what Detroit will do when the enemy fights to the last inch. Once the Allies break the bulge, the war's tempo shifts. Every step east is harder, closer, more desperate. The German army fights with the knowledge that every mile lost brings the war to their doorstep. Anti-tank guns hide behind every hedgerow. Panthers lurk in ruined towns. Roads are mined, bridges blown, forests booby-trapped. This is where Detroit's output becomes something more than industrial might. It becomes endurance. American armored divisions still lose Shermans at alarming rates. Some are hit by Panzerfausts fired from windows. Some are destroyed by mines buried under frost. Others simply break under mechanical strain from non-stop movement through mud, snow, and shattered infrastructure. But the difference now is what comes next. A tank is lost. A Sherman takes a hit outside Cologne. The crew bails out under fire. The tank burns. In most armies, that loss would sting for weeks, a hole in a formation that can't be filled. Hours later, a replacement arrives. Sherman is already en route from a depot in Belgium, itself supplied by a ship that unloaded last week, which itself was filled by trains from the tank arsenal only days before. What Germany sees as attrition, the U.S. treats as rotation. This is the grim arithmetic of the final months. Where the Reich loses strength, America redistributes it. Cologne, March 1945 A's. American forces push toward the Rhine. Tank battles erupt inside the ruins of cities. Streets choked with rubble become killing zones. Snipers line upper floors. German tank crews, now often teenagers or exhausted veterans, fight with the ferocity of people who know there's nowhere left to fall back. In Cologne, one of the war's most famous armored duels unfolds. A Sherman faces off with a Panther near the cathedral. The Panther gets the first shot, then the second, then the third. The Sherman is destroyed, but another rolls forward minutes later and another after that. The Panther has no such succession. It's a singular machine. Once it's gone, it's gone. American tank crews understand this imbalance. German tank crews feel it in their bones. Crossing the Rhine has haunted German planners since the first year of the war. It's their last natural defense line, a river wide enough and fast enough to force any attacker to halt, regroup, and suffer. But when the Allies reach the river, the reality is different. Engineers have bridges ready within hours, ferry points appear, and the tanks keep coming. By now, columns of Shermans are so long they stretch beyond the horizon, a moving demonstration of what industrial victory looks like. German units try to counterattack. Some succeed in inflicting losses. A Panther might ambush a column and knock out 2, 3, 4 Shermans before it's spotted. But each ambush ends the same way. The Panther runs out of shells, fuel, or luck. And the Shermans keep arriving. Back in Detroit, the atmosphere shifts. The end isn't here yet, but everyone feels it. Workers weld faster, as if speed alone can shorten the war. New variants roll out. Upgunned Fireflies for the British. Easy 8 Shermans with improved firepower and suspension, specialized recovery vehicles, and command tanks. The lines never slow. Not once. And even as victory nears, the intensity doesn't fade. If anything, the pressure increases. American commanders want momentum to carry them into Germany's industrial heartland before the Soviets reach Berlin. Every hour matters. Every tank matters. Detroit answers the demand the same way it always has, with motion. By April, German tank crews report something unprecedented. They're running out of machines before they run out of men. Some formations receive orders to hold defensive lines with no armor at all. Others fight with hastily assembled vehicles, training tanks, prototypes, even anti-aircraft guns repurposed for ground combat. Against this, American armored units roll forward with fresh reserves. The contrast is jarring. One side is fighting the war it wants to fight. The other is fighting the one it can. When historians talk about the end of the war in Europe, they often point to the failed German offensive, the Allied air campaign, or the Soviet advance. But there's another layer beneath all of that, quieter but decisive. Every time a Sherman is knocked out and replaced, every time a division is refitted in days, not weeks, every time a supply ship unloads tanks faster than ports can stack them. That's Detroit's hand on the war. Germany loses because it can't break that chain. It can't outrun it. It can't match it. And in the final weeks, as American tanks cut through the countryside toward the Elbe, the truth becomes unavoidable. Detroit didn't just outbuild the Reich, it outlasted it. When the war finally breaks, it doesn't feel like victory inside the factories. It feels like silence, the kind that settles after years of constant noise. For the first time since the line opened, the arsenal slows. Welders step away from booths that still glow hot. Mechanics set down tools they've carried like extensions of their own hands. And then they look around and realize something strange. They've been fighting a war they never saw. Detroit lost people without ever hearing a shot fired. Not to enemy fire, but to exhaustion, accidents, illnesses that went untreated during double shifts. The official casualty lists don't show their names, but the factories feel their absence. Each missing worker is a gap in a crew, a silence in a place that once hummed, and yet, the emotional weight goes deeper. Every tank built here had a crew. Every crew had a fate. When returning soldiers visit the arsenal and thank workers for the machines that carried them through Normandy, the bulge, or the push into Germany, it hits differently. For some workers, it's the first time the abstract idea of the front becomes a face, a person standing in front of them, alive, because a weld held or an engine didn't fail. For others, the moment is harder. They meet a crew missing a man, or a tank commander who walked away from a hull that never made it home. Detroit built weapons, but Detroit also carried that responsibility. From a military standpoint, the outcome is staggering. In just a few years, American industry produced more armored vehicles than Germany, Italy, and Japan combined. The sheer availability of replacement tanks allowed Allied commanders to fight with a tempo the Axis couldn't match. It changed how offensives were planned, how ground was held, and how quickly losses could be restored. The war in Europe didn't end because American tanks were better. Many weren't. It ended because the United States fielded the most consistent, reliable, and rapidly replenished armored force the world had ever seen. Even German generals admitted it after the war. One wrote that the United States had replaced the battlefield with a factory floor. Not an insult, but a grudging acknowledgement of how the balance tipped. Only after the guns fall silent do journalists, commanders, and foreign observers walk through the arsenal and understand what happened here. They see the vast staging areas, the rows of tanks ready for shipment, the miles of conveyors that never slept. Industry leaders from defeated Axis nations tour the facility and realize how outmatched they truly were. Some are stunned. Others are numb. A few are openly angry that they never understood how large the gap had been. What Detroit built wasn't just machinery. It built inevitability. But now the war is over, and a new question hangs in the air. What happens to a factory that's built for emergency speed when the emergency ends? Some workers hope to return to normal life, to cars, to families, to a pace that doesn't feel like combat. Others worry the jobs will vanish when the line shuts down. Management debates whether the arsenal should pivot to peacetime production or be mothballed. The answer, like so many things in war, comes slowly and unevenly, but one truth is already clear. After building more than 22,000 tanks, more than any plant on Earth, The Detroit tank arsenal has already done the one job it was created for. America doesn't need it at wartime speed anymore. The world doesn't either. The next challenge isn't producing machines, it's learning how to return to life without them. Stand in the empty arsenal long after the last shift has gone home, and you notice something unexpected. Without the engine noise, without the sparks and shouting and motion, the building feels impossibly large, like it's holding the echo of everything it once did. The war didn't leave marks on the walls. It left marks on the people, on the welders who carried the pressure of strangers' lives, on the engineers who spent nights redrawing faulty parts, on the crews who trusted machines built by hands they would never shake. What this place proved isn't that America could outbuild its enemies. It proved that ordinary people, pushed into an extraordinary moment, can shape the course of a continent without ever stepping onto a battlefield. And when the lights finally dim on the factory floor, the silence isn't empty, it's acknowledgement, a quiet nod to the thousands who showed up day after day, knowing their work would matter in places they'd never see. The machines are gone, the war is over, but the weight of what happened here never really leaves.